I'm going to show you how to create a custom form in VRA8. Let's get started.
Hi everyone, I'm Watrous from VVork. If this is your first time here and you want to learn about automating, programming, and monitoring in VMware environments, you're in the right place. Start now by subscribing and click the bell so that you don't miss a thing. In that last video, we went into Service Broker, we went to the self-service catalog, we saw our blueprint, we did a request from that blueprint, but it was pretty boring. It just asked us the usual questions. What do you want to call the deployment? What's the description? What project? What version number? There wasn't any drop-down list asking me the size of the VM, not even a statically defined drop-down list. If you want to add things to the request form, what you need to do is create a custom form. Now, before we get started, if you're jumping in the middle of this series of videos, this is an 8-part video series. If you haven't seen the first one, starting in video 1, go check out the playlist up above and you can find your way back to the beginning. But for those of us who already are on part 5, let's go into the lab environment. Here we are again in the self-service catalog, looking at that boring request that we were doing in the previous video. Now, we didn't actually submit this request because, again, it was so boring. This form here for this request needs some pizzazz. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to click that cancel button. All right, we've canceled the request. And I'm going to go to the Content and Policies tab, where, as you can see, here's the content sources section we went to before and the content sharing section. This time we need to go to the content section. And you'll notice that when we go to the content section, we find our blueprint. Currently we only have one, my blueprint. And what we're going to do is click on this triple dot button, and you'll see we get 2 choices. If I want to, I can change the icon associated with this blueprint. So if I choose Customize Icon, I can change the icon so that when the user's in the self-service catalog, they'll see a different icon here. But we're going to leave that alone. You can figure out how to do that. Instead, we're going to go back to Content and Policies. In the Content section, we're going to click the 3-dot button, the triple dot button on our blueprint, and we're going to choose Customize Form. And now we're looking at the Custom Form Designer. In the Custom Form Designer, over on the left side, we can see our blueprint. And my screen resolution is really low here so that I can fit everything into this video. Let me do a little bit of resizing here. There we go. Now I can see everything I need to see. So here we are in the Actually, it's not the Blueprint Designer. This is the Custom Form Designer. It designs the form that the user is going to see when they make a request from our blueprint. This is the Custom Form Designer. In the Custom Form Designer, in this section here, this is our canvas where we're going to design the custom form. And as you can see, it already has the 3 things that we're accustomed to seeing. So when we do a request from a blueprint, when we request a deployment, it asks us the name of the deployment, the description, and the project. If we wanted to, one way we could customize our form would be to select an element such as this one here. And if I didn't perhaps want to ask the user to describe the deployment, I could click on this 3-dot button and choose to delete that. If I do, it disappears from the form designer. But if ever I want to get it back, the standard things that show up in a form show up in here. So for instance, I've gotten rid of description, but I can always get it right back. Let me see if I can position this here again. There we go. So we got description back. Additionally, I can add more elements. We see a bunch of generic elements down below. For instance, maybe I want to have a message, a piece of text on the screen for the user. So I just simply drag out this text thing, select text, and then over here, if I wanted to, I could change it to other types of things like a text field or a text area or a password field. I can do the same thing by dragging these here, but I'm going to leave this as a text, just plain old text. And in order to change what the text says, I'm going to go to this Values tab, and I'm going to change its value. So I could put in a message here to my users to say something like, I don't know, how about hello world? Not terribly exciting, but it illustrates the point. So if I want to add text, we'll talk about text fields in a moment. If I want to add text or images or drop-down lists or things like that, I just drag them over and I start working with them. By the way, when you drag these generic elements, do take note up here at this field ID. That'll come in important later on. But I don't need or want this hello world thing. Let me get rid of it. I'm going to click the triple dot button. I'll choose delete, and it's gone. Instead, what I'm going to do is add a text field. So for instance, let's imagine when this machine gets built, we're not just going to build the machine. What if we also wanted to create a user in that machine? And what if we wanted the person who's making this request to be able to pick the user? Well, to get that information, we could drag out a text field, plop it into our design canvas, maybe change, instead of labeling this text field, we could change the label to something more descriptive like username. And there are other things that we could set, but this thing called a text field allows us to permit the user to type in a string. Now we can place constraints on that string, such as if I needed to say something like the string length needs to be between 1 character and 20 characters, or maybe instead of entering a string, maybe instead I'm going to have them enter an integer, in which case I can set constraints on the range of numbers that they can type. All of these different generic elements have constraints that we can place on them, which is a topic that we can address in future videos. But for right now, if I want to, I can ask for the name here, and I could perhaps drag out a password field and a whole bunch of other elements, but eventually this form is going to start getting a bit overwhelming for the user. So rather than continuing to put more and more things here, like a password field and other things, what I can do is divide these questions we're asking, I can divide them up into different pages or different tabs. Now, I'm going to go ahead and leave this username field here. Notice that allows the user to type the name of the account that they want to create. And because I dragged out a password field, that means that the user is going to be able to type a password and no one looking over their shoulder is going to be able to see it. So that's what a basic text field and a password field looks like. But I want to show you how to create a new tab. Now, the tab I'm going to show you here is admittedly a bit contrived. I'm going to create a tab for reasons that will make sense here shortly. I'm going to add a tab. All I did was click Add Tab. I get a new tab. All I'm going to do is go over here to change the title of that tab. And for reasons that will make a little more sense in a little bit, I'm going to call this Groceries. Again, it's a bit of a contrived example, but I'm trying to keep things simple. So here on the Groceries tab, what if I wanted to ask the user to tell me their favorite vegetable? Because then I could go out and do some grocery shopping and buy them some of their favorite vegetable. Again, this is a contrived example, but I could ask them to type in a string. For instance, they could type tomato, but they're not going to know what to type if I simply say text field. I need to change that label to something more appropriate, like select a vegetable. Select a vegetable. So now the end user is going to know what I'm asking for. And maybe when I go shopping, I'm not just going to buy them one vegetable. Maybe I want to allow the user to choose a fruit that they would like me to buy. Now, instead of using a text field like I'm using in this first case, I'm going to instead use a drop-down list. Because drop-down lists are great for a whole lot of reasons. One of which is if I set up a text field, it's going to be, I have the ability to set constraints on what they type, but when you let a user type any old string into a text field, the user could either intentionally or unintentionally type something that doesn't make any sense. Or if the user's malicious, they might type something that could cause problems. So oftentimes, instead of using a text field, we'll use a drop-down list. So again, I'm going to use this drop-down list to ask the user to select a fruit. So instead of labeling this drop-down list, I'm going to label it select a fruit. And what I'm going to do is hard code a list of 3 different fruits. To do that, I'm going to go over to the Values tab. And in the Values tab, I can set a default value. I'll show you how that works in a moment. But what I want to do, first of all, is populate the drop-down list. So I'm going to go to this Value Options section, which you can see is currently set to something called Constant. And for this first example, that's actually what I want. I'm going to choose Constant as opposed to these other choices. External source is what we're going to choose in the next video. But I'm going to choose Constant here. And as you can see in the little descriptive help here, they are explaining to us here in this grayed out text how exactly I need to specify the list of, in this case, the list of fruits. Now I'm going to type this. I'll speed up the video so you don't have to watch my slow, monotonous, horrible typing, and I'll talk about what I've done here in a moment. But notice before we do that the format I'm going to type in here is I'm going to type a value, a label, and a description separated by pipe signs, comma, another value, another label, another description, comma, and they keep doing that. So each of those 3 things separated by pipe signs is one of the entries in the drop-down list, and the commas are used to separate them. Again, let me type this in. I'll speed up the video so you don't have to watch this. All right, as promised, I sped up the video so you didn't have to watch me type, but let's see what I did type. So what I have here is a hard-coded constant definition of my drop-down list contents. And it has 3 entries or 3 choices that we're going to put into the drop-down list. Here's one, here's another, and then here's a third. So looking at the first, apple, pipe, tasty apple, is our first entry in the drop-down list. Now you'll recall we saw in the gray text a few moments ago that the triplet that I'm specifying here, apple, tasty apple, is a value followed by a label followed by a description. The value, the first part, in this case, lowercase apple, is the piece of information that ultimately is going to get passed to vRealize automation.
It takes a ridiculous amount of time to create these videos. Please take 2 seconds and like this one.
The middle part, capital letters apple, is what the user is going to see in the drop-down list. Then the third thing in each of these entries is a description that the user will see if they choose this choice. So having set up our statically defined constant list of 3 choices in our drop-down list, let's go save our custom form. So I'm going to scroll down, go to the Save button, and what we're going to do next is go over to the catalog. Now, I already know I'm making a mistake here. I want to illustrate something. I'm going to the catalog. Here's my blueprint. I'm clicking Request, and the form looks exactly the same way it did before. What went wrong? Well, let me cancel. We'll go back to Content and Policies. We'll go back to Content. We'll once again hit the triple dot button for my blueprint so that we can customize its form, and allow me to show you this slider here. You need to, let me do it right now, in 3, 2, 1, you need to activate the custom form. So don't forget that part. So activate the form, scroll down, click the Save button, then go to the catalog. And now when we go to the catalog, to our blueprint, and request a deployment, notice that we see that username and password, again, the username is a plain old text field. When I type into it, you can see what I'm typing. The password field, on the other hand, obfuscates what I'm typing. And in addition, I've got that groceries tab that I defined. And as you'll recall, the groceries tab has two elements in it. The first is a text field. The second is a drop-down list. Now, in the text field, I could type something like potato. On the other hand, the drop-down list has our three different choices. And again, remember, for each of these three choices, we had to specify three pieces of information: the value, the label, which is what we see here, and let me show you the description. I'm going to choose cherry here, and notice this description says yummy cherry. So these are the labels here. This is the description, and the first piece of information in each of these three choices is the piece of data or the value that gets sent to vRealize operation when the user selects apple, banana, or cherry. Now, you may have noticed a couple things in this deployment. When we came in here, the vegetable choice was blank. Wouldn't it have been nice if we could have prompted the user with a default value? They may change the default value to something else, but at least that default value would give them some sort of idea of what we're wanting them to type. Or maybe we want tomato to be the default so that if tomatoes are really popular, users can come in here. If they want a tomato, they don't have to change anything. And similarly, in this drop-down list, it started out blank. So let's cancel out of this request and go modify our form once again. So I'm going to Content and Policies, going back to Content. I'm going back to the triple dot button, choosing Customize Form again. I'm going to go to the Groceries tab again. And this first one will be pretty straightforward. I'm going to select the text field that allows my users to select a value, type a value, and to give them a hint or a default value, I'm going to go to Values. And for default value, why don't we type tomato? So from now on, when the user comes in here, let me scroll back up. When the user comes into the form, we don't see it right now, but when they come into the form, when they're actually requesting a deployment, they're going to see tomato as the default value. And I can do the same type of thing with the drop-down list. With the drop-down list, if I go to Values and set the default value, I could set the default value to, well, I'm not going to type tomato or potato, because if I do that, that's not one of the three choices. The choice that you type here has to be one of the choices that you've already put into the drop-down list. So tomato, potato don't work here. Instead, I need to type either apple, banana, or cherry, because those are the three choices in my drop-down list. Why don't we try banana? B-A-N-A-N-A, banana. Now, I'm going to save this form. I'm not going to bother with this slider again because the form is already active, but I am going to scroll down. I am going to find that save button. I am going to save this form, this custom form. Go back to the catalog tab. And once again, I'm going to make a request. I'm going to jump to the groceries tab. And as you can see here, tomato is showing up as a default value. But if I want to, the end user, can certainly change that to potato. And I also have a default choice for the fruit. Now, notice the default value I typed for the fruit needs to be the value, not this label. It's going to select the label, but the default value select needs to be the value of the choice. In our example, our values were the lowercase letter versions of the fruit. So even though in the custom form, I said the default value is lowercase banana, it's selected, as it always does here, the label for the piece of fruit. So make certain when you set the default value for a drop-down list, two things. One, the default value for the drop-down list needs to be something that's in the is something that's in the choices that you put into the drop-down list. And you need to make certain that you use the value portion of the choice when you set the default value. All right, so now we have a custom form, but the drop-down list in our custom form is statically defined. And what we set out to do in this video series is to create a drop-down list or other types of dynamic content. We want to create a drop-down list that has choices that are dynamically generated. And the way we do that involves, let me pop back over here, let me cancel the request first. Let me pop over to the Content and Policies tab one more time. I'm going to go to Content. I'm going to click the triple dot button for my blueprint. Once again, I'll click Customize Form. I'll click on Groceries, because here's the drop-down list that we want to modify. The way we're going to create a drop-down list that has choices that are dynamically generated is to select the drop-down list, go over to the Values tab. Instead of picking constant and supplying a hard-coded list of choices, what we're going to do to create a dynamic drop-down list is to switch from constant to external source.
Join me in the next video where I'll show you how to create a VRO action to generate our dynamic drop-down list.